Lord of Mysteries. My Identities Echoes Across Time. Chapter 251 to 260. There was no doubt that Lynn's words were straightforward and clear, without any cryptic elements that could lead to misunderstandings. Because of this, Solomon was stunned. For a moment, this Black Emperor, who had been a prominent figure in the Fourth Epoch, didn't know whether to doubt the truth of Lynn's words or to ponder the purpose behind them. Was it simply to showcase his strength and confidence, or was it a warning? Intuition told Solomon that the answer was likely both. As for the former, Solomon lifted his head again, scrutinizing the young man before him. He originally thought that this young man, who had deep connections with Medici and the true creator, had already given him enough surprises. However, he didn't expect there to be an even bigger surprise waiting for him. As far as I know, to suppress the mother tree of desire, at least the power of a great old one is needed, Solomon said, his expression serious, as if questioning and simply stating a fact. You can indeed regard me as a great old one, though my state is relatively poor. Unless necessary, I won't use power above sequence 0, Lynn responded with a smile. He did not hide the fact that his power had limitations because it was meaningless to do so. Even a limited great old one was still a great old one, enough to make Solomon take him seriously and enough to serve as a warning. The fact that Lynn's power had limitations would become apparent through cooperation and contact over time. Lynn was also not planning to overly conceal this fact. Instead, he intended to enhance the script he had written on the side of Amonizes. How can I be sure that you aren't lying? Solomon stared into Lynn's eyes as he said this. He couldn't afford to be careless about this matter. The existence of a great old one involved too many factors, even if he was in a poor state. And, how could someone become a great old one in this era? Solomon's eyes showed confusion, and he did not hide this confusion, as theoretically, no great old one should be born in this era. It wasn't that no one could do it, but even if someone could, they wouldn't want to. In this era, advancing to a great old one had too high chance of awakening the original creator within. It's not just the three major pathways that had the problem of the mysteries within reviving, other pathways were no better. Otherwise, why would the Evernight goddess wait until the end of the world to ally with Lilith to backstab the god of combat to attempt advancing to a great old one? Before that, did the Evernight goddess not have the opportunity to control the death uniqueness or kill the god of combat? Clearly, it wasn't like that. With the arrangements the Evernight goddess had made, she could have attempted to do so early in the Fifth Epoch. The reason for waiting until the end of the world was that the possibility of awakening the original creator's will in her body was the smallest then. Adam also waited until the end of the world to advance to the visionary, for a similar reason. Otherwise, with the situation he caused in the Fourth Epoch, if he wanted to arrange the visionary ritual, he could have done it long ago. The only reason for waiting until the end of the Fifth Epoch was having suffered from the God Almighty's consciousness once and not wanting to repeat it. Solomon didn't know about the original novel, but he was very clear about the revival of the wills of the great old ones. Hence, he was genuinely perplexed as to how there could be a great old one in this era. This puzzled emotion made Solomon look at the surrounding allies. Ouroboros still had his signature dumb look, the true creator had his eyes lowered, making his emotions unreadable, but Medici seemed a bit surprised, yet not overly so, just looking thoughtfully at Lynn. Solomon. Aren't you guys hearing about this for the first time too? Solomon suddenly felt that his allies were unreliable, or rather, the true creator might be a reliable ally in other matters, but clearly not when it came to Lynn. Although I could directly use my strength to prove myself, it seems a waste of my precious power for such a thing, Lynn said leisurely as he poured himself a cup of tea, not in a hurry to prove himself. He really didn't plan to prove himself through action. Borrowing the power of a great old one was no joke, even if only for an instant, it was recklessly tempting fate. So Lynn's decision was simple. He tilted his head to look at Solomon and said, currently, the only person who has seen me hammer the mother tree of desire aka bitch tree is Bethel. So if you think I'm lying, you can directly ask Bethel. Bethel. What does this have to do with Mr. Door? Solomon was stunned again, then he understood something and said, so, the reason Bethel allows you to act under the identity of Libert is because you saved him from the mother tree of desire. You could understand it that way, and it wouldn't be wrong. Lynn nodded, thought for a moment, then added, "Oh, and I also hammered tutor. Although this doesn't prove I have the power of a great old one, it can at least prove I can easily suppress an ordinary sequence 0. It can also prove that you could easily hammer me if you wanted to." Black Emperor Solomon added in his heart. He didn't doubt the truth of this matter because Tutor's previous attitude of clear anger yet obvious apprehension, along with the move Lynn had shown earlier, had already proved this point. At the same time, Solomon could see that the young man indeed intended to show his cards and threaten him. As for the reason for the threat, it was clearly for better cooperation when establishing the church for the true creator later. And the other party didn't hide this intention. To be honest, since advancing to a high sequence, Solomon had rarely seen such a straightforward expression. High sequencers in this world generally preferred a more tactful approach to express their attitudes, showcase their strength, and issue necessary threats. Direct actions were rare among Sequence 0 and Angels. Except for the Lord of Storms, who had no brains from the beginning, most Sequence 0 and Angels were good at schemes and plots. Solomon, though not the best among them, had seen many. However, Lynn's straightforward approach was undeniably effective, especially when the person in question was strong enough and could bring benefits. Solomon indeed couldn't ignore Lynn's threat, but he didn't develop any dislike for Lynn because of it. Sometimes, overly direct expressions could be annoying, but at times, they could also evoke subtle feelings, especially when the person stood on the same side as you. Yes, for Solomon, Lynn at this moment undoubtedly belonged to the category of allies. End of chapter. Compared to the faith that might be shared after establishing the Church of the True Creator, having an ally at the Sequence 0 level or even stronger was undoubtedly more beneficial for Solomon. Solomon suddenly exhaled and said, "I still can't confirm whether what you said is true or not, but pleasure working with you." The Black Emperor extended his hand. "Pleasure working with you." The mechanical angel shook his hand. Although their cooperation was confirmed, Lynn did not rush to discuss the establishment of the Church of the True Creator with Solomon. He merely handed over a preliminary plan for the church to Solomon for his review. After all, they were still in the middle of a tea party, and establishing a complete church involved too many issues to be discussed at such an event. It was more appropriate to have a detailed discussion in Solomon's palace. Just like his cooperation with the Evernight goddess, Lynn did not go into detail with her either. Some matters cannot be explained in just a few words, and it was more suitable to discuss them slowly later. Confirming a preliminary cooperation at the tea party was sufficient. After reaching a consensus with Solomon, a satisfied Lynn turned his attention to Ouroboros, who seemed to be in a daze. To be honest, being in a daze might seem strange for other kings of angels, but for Ouroboros, it was quite normal. However, Lynn could tell that Ouroboros seemed a bit different this time, prompting him to ask, "What's wrong, Ouroboros? Are you feeling unhappy?" Not unhappy. Ouroboros seemed to come to his senses at Lynn's words. He shook his head slowly and looked at Lynn, saying, "I was just thinking if I should go say hello to Will." Hearing this, Lynn's eyes lit up immediately, and he encouraged, "If you want to say hello, then go ahead. With me here, you won't end up fighting. Think of it as a normal meeting, although this might be the first normal meeting since you've known each other." Although he had never seen it himself, Lynn knew that Ouroboros and Will's usual interactions were more like catch-and-release games, with Ouroboros going home to paint and pray when he failed to catch Will. Considering Ouroboros' rather simple personality, it was hard to say if the two Mercury snakes had ever communicated normally. Of course, theoretically, they didn't need to communicate. Oh. Ouroboros' gaze shifted to Will, who tensed up briefly before returning to normal. Ouroboros pondered for a moment, or maybe not, before standing up and walking directly toward Will. Lynn, on the other hand, seemingly teleported and sat beside Will ahead of time, smiling and saying, "Don't worry, Ouroboros just wants to say hello. As the host of the tea party, I assure your safety here." His tone sounded comforting, but anyone could see his anticipation for the ensuing drama. It was clear that Lynn had no intention of hiding his anticipation. This made Will roll his eyes and mutter, "You're just retaliating for me avoiding you." "Yes, I thought you already knew." Lynn nodded without hesitation, showing no embarrassment. Arranging a meeting between the two snakes was not only for the drama but also to torment Will. "Lynn, when wanting to torment someone, wouldn't easily get distracted. Pausing the tea party temporarily was just because Lynn had thought of a better way to trouble him. Will was still too young to understand Lynn's tricks. Klein, on the other hand, would have been on high alert from the start, prepared for the torment. As the two of them whispered, Ouroboros finally reached Will. He did not sit down across from him but stood there, staring at Will as if contemplating something. This silence lasted for half a minute, with Ouroboros silently watching Will, who calmly watched back. After another half-minute of staring, Will suddenly leaned back, covering his eyes with his hand, and said, "I can't believe I'm competing with a stupid person." Ouroboros showed a puzzled expression and asked, "Competing for what?" Not seeming to care much for the answer, he continued, "I thought about it, and if we are to greet each other saying, 'hello,' would be indeed the best." "Hello, Will," Ouroboros said seriously. "Figures." Will was unsurprised and sighed, "Sometimes I really don't understand how you became a king of angels. Were you once normal and just became slow-witted after being around the true creator for too long? Isn't it possible that a king of angels on the Wheel of Fortune pathway doesn't need brains, just fate's favor?" Lynn interjected earnestly. "I've always been normal," Ouroboros replied seriously, understanding the meaning behind Will's words but not caring. Ouroboros didn't think there was anything abnormal about his personality. He might not be as smart as others, but not everyone in the world was smart. He just needed to fulfill his duties and follow destiny's guidance without needing to be overly intelligent. In a way, Ouroboros lived quite contently. If you truly had fate's favor, you'd already be the Wheel of Fortune. Will muttered, unafraid of offending since they were mortal enemies. In a sequence struggle, no one would back down, and the winner would be determined by their abilities. If you had fate's favor, you'd already have accumulated the uniqueness, Ouroboros retorted slowly. The two fate pathway angels continued to hurt each other until Lynn interjected again. "Speaking of fate's favor, I know someone who is truly favored by fate. They managed to ascend to Sequence 0 without fully digesting the Sequence 1 potion and without performing the Godhood ritual, then spent 1,000 years barely digesting the potion, only to luckily find someone to help digest it completely, ultimately winning by luck." Lynn concluded, looking at the two snakes of Mercury with pity. Maybe the best candidates for the Wheel of Fortune pathway beyonders are in other pathways. Ouroboros. Will. End of chapter. If you want, support me on Patreon and get access to 30 translated chapters in advance. Lynn's words were not just simple stabs to the heart but directly pierced through the hearts, livers, and lungs of both Ouroboros and Will. After all, among these two angels on the Wheel of Fortune pathway, Ouroboros had become a king of angels by the end of the second epic but hadn't progressed further since then. After so many years, he only possessed two Sequence 1 characteristics as a king of angels. Will had obtained the uniqueness of the Wheel of Fortune pathway early on, but he couldn't accommodate it. Over the years, the uniqueness hadn't brought him any help and to some extent, it only became a burden. It could be said that if either of these two had even half the luck of the future god of steam and machinery, they wouldn't be in such a state. "Can I ask who you are talking about?" Will pressed his aching chest and looked at Lynn seriously. As an angel on the Wheel of Fortune pathway, Will couldn't tolerate knowing nothing about such a lucky existence. Moreover, Will was confused because, in his memory, none of the existing Sequence 0 beyonders matched Lynn's description. "Oh, this." Lynn smiled at Will's expectant gaze and slowly said, "You can guess." "Will. Forget it, you don't want to say it anyway." Will turned his head, puffing his cheeks in displeasure like a child. It could be said that no child at this banquet was more dedicated than Will. "Just kidding," Lynn laughed, then casually tugged on Will's hair, making him tear up before letting go and coughing lightly. "But I really don't plan to tell you because it's unnecessary. The lucky guy won't be as lucky this time, so be confident, you two angels on the Wheel of Fortune pathway are still the unluckiest." Lynn's tone remained gentle, as if he was talking about something trivial. However, Will broke out in a cold sweat. It wasn't Will's fault. Lynn's words contained too obvious an implication, almost explicitly stating, "I'm going to get rid of that overly lucky guy." How could this not make Will feel creepy? Ha ha ha. Lynn suddenly laughed, deliberately using those words to tease Will. He lightly patted Will's head. "Just kidding. I'm not that ruthless. I don't plan to kill him." I just want to replace him and become the paragon. Hearing this, Will didn't know whether to continue feeling creeped out or to sigh in relief. But remembering what Lynn had said before, Will had a guess. He couldn't help but ask, what you just said hasn't happened yet, right? Yes, these are things that will happen in the future. Well, the original future, Lynn nodded, not hiding anything. He suddenly showed a mysterious expression and asked, Will, do you want to know what your future is like? Will was tempted. Although he couldn't be sure if what Lynn said was true, there seemed to be no harm in listening. So Will asked, can you really tell me what my future is like? Ouroboros also looked at Lynn, his eyes full of curiosity. He wasn't interested in many things, but Will, being his old rival, was one of them he is interested in. Facing the curious gazes of the two snakes of Mercury, Lynn calmly waved them closer. When the two got near, he lowered his voice and shared like a secret, Will, you're the most unlucky guy. Until the apocalypse arrives, you won't successfully accumulate the uniqueness of the Wheel of Fortune pathway. Will was visibly stunned. He then looked at Lynn in disbelief. So in the end, did this stupid snake win? No, at least not in the scope of my knowledge. Lynn shook his head honestly, then sympathetically said to the two, you two are equally unlucky. 1,000 years from now, when the apocalypse comes, you'll still be in the same state. It really makes one wonder if your time flows differently from others. Will suddenly felt a bit down. If Lynn's earlier example was just a simple stab in the heart, his current words made Will doubt if he was indeed an angel on the Wheel of Fortune pathway. As the Snake of Mercury, at least he shouldn't be this unlucky, right? For over 1,000 years, hadn't he encountered that crucial opportunity of fate? That's right, the opportunity of fate. As the pathway that governs luck, the apotheosis ritual of the Wheel of Fortune pathway is very simple. Find the correct opportunity in the flow of fate and directly consume the potion to ascend to sequence 0. Accumulating the uniqueness is a simplified version of the apotheosis ritual. In other words, a truly lucky Snake of Mercury might find the right opportunity right after ascending to sequence 1 and then directly become a god. For instance, Lynn once suspected that if the future god of steam and machinery were on the Wheel of Fortune pathway, he might find the right opportunity right after digesting the sequence 2 potion and ascend directly. However, the unlucky ones could refer to Will, vividly demonstrating what it means to be unlucky on the Wheel of Fortune pathway. Even with the uniqueness in hand, he couldn't accumulate it. Ouroboros was also stunned by Lynn's words, but he wasn't particularly concerned about being the same after 1,000 years. Instead, he seriously asked, am I still following my lord at that time? Indeed, that's you. At this moment, Will and Lynn's thoughts coincided. Can't you have a bit more ambition? Will said, not knowing how to describe his feelings. As Ouroboros, rival and the stronger one, it was good for Will that he wasn't ambitious. But it was like seriously competing against a top student, only to find out that the top student was a laid-back slacker. It made one feel like punching a cotton pillow continuously. If fate favors me, I can become fate. If not, I'll accept my fate and meet my end, Ouroboros said slowly and seriously. Hearing this, both Lynn and Will frowned. Will almost rolled his eyes and said irritably, what if fate arranges for you to die? Will you accept that too? It wasn't Will's fault for this attitude. Although he often acted based on fate's guidance, he never had the mindset of living strictly by fate's arrangements. Whether it was fate's guidance, instructions, or so-called favoritism, Will would use them but never allow himself to become fate's puppet. If everything was according to fate's guidance, why become the Wheel of Fortune? He might as well downgrade to a sequence 2 and find a true god to follow. TN. Had some time on my hands, edited the first 50 chapters, fixed some mistakes, and added some scenes. End of chapter. If you want, support me on Patreon and get access to 30 translated chapters in advance. Ouroboros fell silent for a few seconds before slowly nodding and saying, yes. Ah, this. Lynn suddenly didn't know what to say. He scrutinized Ouroboros for a few moments before waving to Medici beside him and said, we're doomed, little red. I think the dumb snake has truly lost it. He said if fate decrees his death, he will obediently wait for it. Is that something a sane person would do? He hasn't been sane for a long time, but I didn't expect him to be this far gone, Medici scoffed, his brow furrowing. As an angel, He naturally overheard the whispers at the next table, but he hadn't expected to hear such a statement. Has Ouroboros' self-awareness been suppressed to this extent by divinity? Medici's frown deepened. The war angel cared for few people or things, but Ouroboros, who had followed the true creator and partnered with him for many years, was certainly one. As a former Kings of Angels of the Red Priest pathway, Medici also did not believe in so-called fate. Thus, he always regarded Ouroboros' actions following fate's guidance with disdain and naturally disagreed with his view. The true creator, although silent, also glanced at Ouroboros. Apparently, this was the first time the true creator's faction had heard Ouroboros' thoughts on following fate to death. They had never discussed this topic before. I'm not insane, Ouroboros seriously refuted, feeling the other's gazes. A hint of confusion appeared in his eyes. He continued, did I do something wrong? Of course, it's wrong, Ouroboros. As in Kings of Angels of the Wheel of Fortune pathway, following fate's instructions is normal, but not to this extent. Otherwise, what's the difference between you and a puppet of fate? Lynn said angrily, looking at Ouroboros almost with pity. You should use fate as a tool, like I use time as a tool, a power. I wouldn't let this tool make me do things I dislike, let alone die for it. Though Lynn has a shit for brain, I agree with him on this, Medici said, arms crossed, leaning against the table, his blood-red eyes on Ouroboros. Whether it's fate or something else, it's just a sword. The sword should be firmly held in hand, not turning on its master. The wielder should never be controlled by the sword. From my standpoint, I should encourage you to maintain this mindset, but Will gave Ouroboros a complex look, even sighing. To think my rival is just a puppet makes even winning feel meaningless. Even the true creator rarely spoke up at this moment. Ouroboros, I hope you value your life more. Ouroboros was bewildered. He looked around at everyone, finally saying, but I've always followed fate's arrangements. Isn't that correct? You're not wrong. Lynn placed a calming hand on Ouroboros' shoulder but then changed his tone. But you're a thinking being. When making choices, you should first listen to your deepest thoughts. Seeing Ouroboros still confused, Lynn patiently added, let me ask you a question. If fate instructed you to kill Medici one day, would you do it? Ouroboros' eyes widened slightly. He glanced at Medici, and after a few seconds, shook his head. I don't know. Do you want to do it? Lynn gently prompted. I don't want to, Ouroboros quickly answered, looking at Medici seriously. I don't want to harm Medici. TCH, as if you could. Even as a sequence 9, I could still outsmart you, Medici scoffed, avoiding eye contact with Ouroboros. Clearly, Medici wasn't entirely unaffected by Ouroboros' words. Lynn smiled and continued, if fate instructed you to betray the true creator. I wouldn't. Ouroboros shook his head firmly. See, that's it. Lynn nodded in satisfaction. Fate's guidance doesn't always align with your inner self. Fate might give you guidance that you can't accept or that brings great danger. For such guidance, you should learn to think and refuse. Ouroboros showed rare contemplation but still seemed quite confused. This wasn't surprising. After all, it's Ouroboros. You can't expect someone who rarely uses their brain to suddenly think clearly. Lynn expected this situation and continued smiling. I know it's hard for you to stop following fate's guidance suddenly and start thinking, so let's start simple. Ouroboros looked at Lynn, waiting for his answer. Lynn pulled Little Red over, saying, next time you get a fate directive, think about it first. If you can't, ask Little Red's opinion. I don't mind enlightening this dumb snake, Medici said, eyeing Ouroboros with disdain before sighing. He said nothing more, but it was clear what he meant. Anyone else might have been angry, but Ouroboros was indifferent, nodding seriously. Okay, I'll remember. Lynn sighed in relief but also with some resignation. Depending on others isn't ideal, but it's better than relying on fate's arrangements. Medici, under normal circumstances, wouldn't harm his teammates. During this process, Medici could guide Ouroboros to think for himself. Lynn glanced at Ouroboros, then at Medici, suddenly silent. He realized his group was full of problem children. Instead of relying on them to save each other. Maybe I should find a professional psychiatrist, and get Ouroboros more followers. His personality must be way too much influenced by divinity. Lynn felt once again that his decision to establish the True Creator's Church was very correct. It was a win-win strategy. End of chapter. When it comes to reliable psychiatrists in the mysteries world, Lynn's first thought is undoubtedly Adam. Regardless of Adam's character and personality, in the field of psychiatry, this king of angels of the spectator pathway is undoubtedly top-notch. The only issue is that Ouroboros also belongs to the camp of the True Creator, and Lynn isn't certain if Adam would be willing to treat Ouroboros and whether he would secretly sabotage the treatment. However, since Medici also receives treatment from Adam, Lynn feels more at ease. After all, if Adam were to do anything, Medici would be of greater value than Ouroboros. Lynn considers Medici more important, so if Adam refrains from doing anything to Medici during treatment, he likely wouldn't trouble Ouroboros either. With this in mind, Lynn decides to talk to Adam later. Just then, he notices that the gods and angels who had left in small groups are gradually returning to the banquet hall. Some have serious expressions, some look helpless, and others seem unchanged, either genuinely unaffected or hiding their emotions well. Lynn isn't surprised, the free activity time was limited, and it was nearly time for the next segment to start. His gaze sweeps over Adam's seat and sees Adam back in his place, with a battered Amon next to him. Wait a minute. Lynn's attention is drawn to Amon. He examines Amon carefully and sees that his hair is standing on end as if struck by lightning. A small white flower is growing from his ear, seemingly harmless and weak but subtly draining Amon's vitality. The drain isn't significant enough to endanger Amon's life but does cause weakness and pain. Amon's forehead is bruised, his left eye is bruised like wearing dark eyeshadow, and there's an aura of bad luck around him. His clothes are also damaged, with the right sleeve scorched as if burned. Lynn mentally matches the damage to various gods: Storm, Earth, Evernight, Tutor. He can't help but laugh out loud. He knew that today's situation would be a time for settling old scores, but he didn't expect Amon to be so universally hated. Every god, except Solomon and the True Creator, had taught Amon a lesson. Evidently, Amon has lived up to his title as a blasphemer, having provoked nearly half of the living gods. Normally, no one deals with Amon because he has powerful backers, the True Creator and Adam, his father figures. Even though the True Creator is mad and not on good terms with Amon, he is still a deterrent. Adam, as Amon's brother and another father figure, is far more sociable and has countless hidden cards. This deters others from attacking Amon. Additionally, the pathways they follow are adept at hiding, making it hard to catch Amon even if the gods want to. Hence, few have managed to deal with Amon, leaving them simmering with anger. Today's gathering provided a rare chance to attack Amon's main body, which they wouldn't miss. Well. Lynn shakes his head, openly enjoying Amon's misfortune as he approaches, pretending to be concerned. Oh, Amon, did you fall down, or did someone put a sack over your head and beat you up? Amon adjusts his crystal monocle, looking at Lynn with a forced smile. I have you to thank for my special treatment. Don't be so modest, Amon. Lynn shakes his head, smiling. I did seal your powers, but all this hatred is your own doing. Everyone here is civilized and wouldn't beat you up for no reason, unless you were asking for it. Lynn's tone is righteously confident. Not at all, if anyone's pulling hatred, it's you, Amon retorts, understanding Lynn's meaning of attracting hatred from their previous conversations. He tries to sow discord. Guess how many here want to give you double the treatment they gave me? At this, many of the onlookers discreetly shift their attention away, pretending nothing happened. Lynn knows this but is unfazed. He smiles. I know, but it doesn't matter, they can't beat me. So, little Amon, in this world, it's fine to be a troublemaker, but you must be able to bear the consequences, Lynn advises, as if teaching a child. Otherwise, your today will be your tomorrow. Amon doesn't argue, though his mood darkens. Amon naturally wants to become stronger and ascend to Sequence 0 or even become the Lord of Mysteries, but there's a risk that ascending now might turn him into a vessel for the resurrection of the former Lord of Mysteries. The risk is too high. This concern isn't unique to him. Bethel Abraham has hesitated at the final step to godhood for years, not due to the difficulty but because becoming a god now might make him a vessel for resurrection too. This cautiousness distinguishes the three pathways from others. For other pathways, ascending to Sequence 0 in the fourth epoch carries less risk of becoming a vessel. End of chapter. But the situation with the three pathways is different. If the majority of sequence zero's will is used to suppress the will of the celestial worthy, then the celestial worthy's will is mostly used for revival. Therefore, in the fourth epoch, the Beyonders of the three pathways face greater risks in advancing to sequence zero. Amon, although seemingly fond of tightrope walking, is known to be a typical member of the three pathways. Despite his usually reckless behavior, he does not take risks when it comes to life and death matters. Even though he has been beaten by true gods multiple times, Amon has no plans to advance to sequence zero to fight back immediately. Besides, Amon knows that the real reason he has been beaten so badly this time is this libert front of him. In other words, unless Amon advances to a great old one, even if he becomes sequence zero, he will still face constant beatings. Advancing to the Lord of Mysteries in the fourth epoch would be extremely difficult. You might as well say that today will be like every other day for him. Amon chose to remain silent, but Medici's gloating voice had already arrived. The expression of the Angel of War was almost identical to his rogue brother's, even more sarcastic. He looked Amon up and down, clicked his tongue, and with a nauseatingly fake, pitying smile, said, "How pathetic, little raven, getting beaten like this. Did you secretly cry in a corner, or have you already sought comfort from your duck mother?" By duck mother, Medici naturally referred to Amon's eldest brother, Adam. "Thank you for your concern, Medici." Amon, clearly also a good candidate for the hunter pathway, took Medici's sarcasm calmly, glanced at him, and slowly said, "But I'd prefer it if you cared more about yourself. After all, your condition is far worse than mine. You should seek your brother's help more often. I'm sure he won't hesitate to assist you." HMPH. Medici snorted, seemingly unbothered, and looked at Amon, saying, "You don't need to worry about that." Lynn quietly watched their sarcastic exchange while munching on watermelon. He even handed a slice to Adam, who was standing nearby. After a bite, Lynn whispered, "Ouroboros seems off. His self-awareness is being overly suppressed by divinity. I'd like you to diagnose him and see if there's any treatment." Adam accepted the watermelon naturally, took a bite, and said, "I can treat Ouroboros, but I can't change his dull personality. At most, I can make his humanity more stable, giving him more self-awareness." Adam indeed couldn't change Ouroboros' personality, or rather, he could, but that wouldn't fall under treatment. "I never expected you to change his personality. I don't think there's a need to," Lynn said, spitting out watermelon seeds into a newly appeared trash can. "What's the cost?" "No cost," Adam said flatly, not spitting out the seeds, as if he had chewed them to pieces. "You should name a price. I know free things are often the most expensive." Lynn turned to Adam, serious. "In the world of mysteries, nothing is truly free. Every gift of fate has its price marked in the shadows." Lynn preferred clearly priced items over freebies. "Then the cost is that you help me when I need it," Adam said without hesitation, seemingly expecting this. "Agreed, but if you want me to target someone I care about or do something that will significantly harm them, I will refuse," Lynn said, taking another bite of watermelon. "I wouldn't do such meaningless things," Adam replied crisply. He understood Lynn's nature well. For Lynn, the few people he cared about were more important than the entire world. So Adam wouldn't harm those Lynn cared about unless necessary. That would only bring greater disaster to the world. "Then it's settled." Lynn, somewhat aware of Adam's thoughts but not caring, returned to Ouroboros after finishing the watermelon. He explained the situation to Ouroboros. Ouroboros had no objections to seeing a doctor. After listening quietly, he looked seriously at Lynn and said, "I can help you when you need it," multiple times. Lynn was stunned for a moment, then realized Ouroboros wanted to compensate for the cost of seeing a doctor. This made him laugh helplessly. He patted Ouroboros' head and said, "All right." A delivered tool, Lynn wouldn't refuse. HMPH. Medici, standing nearby, sneered. Knowing Lynn's nature well, he understood that countless tasks awaited Ouroboros. As a member of the Second Epoch, Medici still busily managed his Red Army affairs and often got roped into helping Lynn train the kids in combat, experiencing the hardships of being a corporate slave. Even in his poor state, Medici knew Lynn would find many tasks for him. Actually, he already had. Thinking about the intelligence he had gathered and the upcoming establishment of the Church of the True Creator, Medici's expression became complex. He was almost certain he'd be incredibly busy with church affairs soon. But Medici couldn't refuse those tasks, as they were for the Lord and for himself. End of chapter. Regardless of how Medici felt about his foreseeable drudgery, the tea party proceeded smoothly. After all the tea party members returned to the banquet hall, Lynn snapped his fingers, and different tableware appeared before each member. The round table was then filled with an array of delectable dishes. Now, let's begin the second segment of our journey into the pre-epic, modern cuisine, Lynn said with a smile, addressing all the tea party members. The dishes before you are recreations of delicacies from the pre-epic. You can enjoy these while learning about the culinary culture of that bygone era. Lynn's demeanor was more relaxed than before. After all, he had accomplished what he needed to, so whatever happened next would be a pleasant surprise. Lynn could now wholeheartedly enjoy the tea party, treating it like a gathering of troublesome children. While Lynn's secondary identity hosted a tea party for gods and angels during the War of the Four Emperors, in the fifth epic. At 15 Minsk Street, Klein sat on the living room sofa, quietly reading the evening paper. However, his attention was scattered, and he occasionally glanced out the window. Outside, the crimson moon was partially obscured by clouds and mist, revealing it wasn't a full moon. Will there really be a blood moon? Klein murmured. His frequent glances at the moon were due to the prophecy of the Angel of Secrets. It was already late, and the prophesied blood moon hadn't appeared. Nor had Miss Furs, who was supposed to contact them according to the prophecy, shown up, making Klein doubt the prophecy. But considering the Angel of Secrets, despite being unreliable, wouldn't likely mess with them over something important involving Lynn, Klein held back his complaints. However, Lynn, who was also seated on the sofa with a cup of coffee, said, "Are we being played?" Indeed, while his secondary identity entertained gods and angels, Lynn's main body was waiting with Klein for the blood moon. From this perspective, Furs had the same status. I think it's unlikely, Klein said after a few seconds, not entirely confident. You never know. That guy is quite mischievous, Lynn commented on his divine incarnation, his eyes thoughtful. The situation indeed differed from the original novel. Simply put, the blood moon should have appeared by now, but it hadn't. This made Lynn think about yesterday's events and the glance from his true self. Could it be related? Lynn felt a bit uneasy and considered how his angel persona would handle the prophecy's failure if the blood moon didn't appear. Suddenly, the crimson moon outside began to change. In a few seconds, the clouds and mist dispersed rapidly. Under Lynn and Klein's watchful eyes, the half-moon turned into a full, crimson moon. Lynn sighed in relief, grateful that the mother goddess of depravity was reliable, indicating his true self's glance hadn't severely injured her. It's a bit of a pity. Lynn muttered, not surprised the goddess of depravity wasn't severely hurt. She was, after all, an incomplete third pillar, capable of toying with Bethel and Russell. Her endurance must be tenacious. Lynn's true self's glance was out of curiosity, lacking enough power to inflict serious harm. Even Russell, who was affected, was still okay. If the goddess of depravity had been seriously injured by his true self's glance, Lynn might consider indulging in some luxuries, given there'd be no point in resisting. Although I'm unsure if I can still struggle, becoming a great old one is better than nothing. At least then I wouldn't need to borrow power from my true self to fight, Lynn thought, sighing as Klein suddenly started listening intently. This perked Lynn up, making him set aside his minor worries and look forward to what would happen next. Miss Furs is praying to the fool. She seems in great pain. Klein said quickly after a few seconds of listening. I need to check above the gray fog. Go ahead. Lynn had no objections. Since Klein's full identity was exposed to Lynn, he didn't avoid it anymore, stepping back 4 times to reach above the gray fog. Klein saw clear light spreading from beside the fool's seat. Without hesitation, Klein touched the light, hearing Furs' fragmented prayers and cries for help. He saw her, struggling on her living room floor, on the verge of losing control. What's going on? Klein was shocked, not expecting the lively Furs to be in such a dire state. What should I do? The Angel of Secrets predicted Lynn and I would get clues about the Abraham family from Furs, indicating I should be able to resolve her crisis. Klein's mind raced. Noticing faint illusory whispers in Fur's painful prayers, his eyes brightened. He pressed his hand on the ripple, connecting with Fur's spirit and pulling her to the gray fog, just like summoning Tarot Club members. If asked about Fur's feelings now, she'd say it was a mix of confusion, relief, and fear. Confusion because she didn't know why she was suddenly in a majestic palace from her bedroom. Relief because the moon's whispers, causing her near loss of control and bodily mutations, were gone. Fear because she remembered something. In her near-desperate state, unable to seek help from the gods, she had prayed to the evil god who had shown interest in Zio. End of chapter. In the past, Furs had discussed the existence and impact of the evil god known as the Fool with Zio multiple times. Now, Furs finally had the answer to her repeated inquiries. The Fool truly existed and had responded to her prayer. Was this a stroke of luck or misfortune? Furs swallowed nervously and cautiously looked up at the mysterious figure at the head of the bronze table. She suppressed her inner fear, stood up, and respectfully said, "Are you the Fool, Your Excellency?" "You can simply call me Mr. Fool," Klein said with a gentle smile, his tone as warm as ever. He gazed at Furs, who had evidently overcome her tendency to lose control, and breathed a sigh of relief. Then he asked, "How did you get involved with Bethel?" When Klein first saw Furs, he didn't immediately recognize the situation. But after pulling her into the gray fog, he confirmed that the whispers Furs heard were likely from Mr. Dorr. This wasn't a baseless deduction but was supported by two main reasons. Firstly, Russell's diary mentioned that Mr. Dorr would approach reality and call for help during the full moon. Secondly, Furs, identified by Lynn as someone connected to the Abraham family, was likely linked to Bethel Abraham, also known as Mr. Dorr. Bethel. Furs was clearly confused. As a relatively ordinary Beander, she had never heard of someone named Mr. Dorr. However, this didn't prevent her from realizing that Mr. Fool seemed to know the source of the full moon whispers that troubled her. This prompted Furs to quickly ask, "Do you know the origin of those whispers? Do you know who is affecting me? Can you tell me how to resolve this issue?" Furs truly didn't know Mr. Dorr. Or was it that she didn't know his real name? Klein was puzzled but didn't show it. Instead, he smiled and said, "Bethel Abraham, the whispers that trouble you come from him. Perhaps you are more familiar with his other name, Mr. Dorr." Him. Furs's pupils contracted. She had speculated countless times about the source of the whispers but never imagined they would be connected to a being referred to as him. "So it's an angel," Furs murmured, a hint of despair in her expression. Then she became puzzled. "But why would an angel target me? What do I have that's worth such torment? She's just a sequence 8. So, Furs really didn't know Mr. Dorr. But since she could hear his calls for help, it meant she had established a connection with him unknowingly. Klein thought for a moment before smiling and saying, "Perhaps he didn't intend to torment you. He was merely calling for help." "Calling for help from me?" Furs was bewildered. "But those whispers are driving me to the brink of losing control. Without your response and assistance, I might have already turned into a monster." "That's because you are too weak," Klein explained unhurriedly. "Bethel was once the angel closest to becoming a god. The difference in life level between you and him is too vast. Even a benign call for help brings consequences you cannot withstand. Of course, if he deliberately controlled his power, he could communicate with you normally. But as far as I know, Bethel's current state is far from good, so he likely can't manage that." Klein said slowly, drawing on the information from Lynn. Although Lynn hadn't recovered many memories, he wasn't completely ignorant. Hence, Klein knew Mr. Dorr's real name, his near-divine status, and his current dire condition. The angel closest to becoming a god. Furs felt dizzy, and after a while, she forced out a smile uglier than crying. In that case, surviving the first whisper was already a stroke of luck. To have attracted the attention of a near-godly being and still be alive, Furs felt she might be relatively fortunate. Although, perhaps her luck had run out. While shocked and fearful, Furs also thought of something else. If the full moon whispers came from a near-divine being, then what kind of entity was the Fool, who could easily alleviate the effects of whispers and spoke of Mr. Dorr so casually? Furs didn't dare to think further and heard Mr. Fool's gentle voice, "You don't need to be too pessimistic. Since you can hear Bethel's calls for help, it means you have already established a connection with him. If you can find a way to sever this connection, you might be able to escape the whispers that trouble you. Mr. Fool, can you help me sever this connection? I can become your devout follower. Furs almost blurted out. She couldn't think of any other solution than to seek the fool's help. I'm a person who likes equivalent exchanges. If you want me to help you sever the connection with Bethel, what can you offer in return? Klein asked leisurely, intending to probe the reason behind Furz's connection with Mr. Door. As for helping Furs break the connection, Klein wished he could, but knew he couldn't. At most, he could pull her into the gray fog during the full moon, as he did today. Furs froze upon hearing this because she couldn't think of anything valuable to trade with Mr. Fool. As an ordinary Sequence 8, she had nothing noteworthy to offer. This realization left Furs extremely dejected, though she didn't blame the fool. He had no obligation to help her. Rather than asking for my help, you might want to try finding a solution yourself, Klein suggested again, smiling at Furs. The answer might lie in your past. Furs was taken aback by this, then recalled something. She bit her lip and said, it was after using a certain Beander item that I began to hear the full moon whispers. Before that, even as a Beander, I never heard those sounds. End of chapter. Furz's story is quite simple. She used to be an ordinary doctor. While working at the Yosifov clinic, she met an elderly lady, Mrs. Alisa, who was connected to the Abraham family. During the time Furs took care of her, they developed a mother-daughter-like relationship. So, after Mrs. Alisa passed away, Furs inherited her apprentice characteristic according to her wishes, though Furs didn't know it was an apprentice characteristic at the time. She only knew the old lady was connected to a cursed family but wasn't aware it was the Abraham family. Furs simply followed Mrs. Alisa's instructions to prepare the potion using the characteristic and successfully advanced to an apprentice. In addition to this characteristic, Furs also inherited other things from Mrs. Alisa, including some notes containing mysticism knowledge and a special stone bracelet. The bracelet was evidently a sealed artifact of the apprentice pathway, with each stone allowing Furs to use a travel ability once. Mrs. Alisa had warned Furs never to use it unless absolutely necessary, and Furs obeyed until her life was in danger, forcing her to use one of the stones. After that, Furs began to suffer from full moon whispers. If she hadn't been lucky enough to meet the fool, she might have already lost control and turned into a monster. After Furs briefly recounted her story, Klein had some guesses. Smiling, he said, the sealed artifact you used likely came from the Abraham family. It connected you to Bethel. Perhaps you can recall what the lady who gave it to you said. Furz's expression changed slightly as she remembered something. She replied with difficulty. Mrs. Alisa mentioned that her husband was a descendant of a cursed family but avoided the subject. She said I wasn't part of that family and wouldn't be cursed, but I used that bracelet. That bracelet belonged to the Abraham family, so now I'm connected to them and suffering from the full moon whispers. Furs, being a writer, had excellent associative abilities. I'm so stupid. Mrs. Alisa clearly warned me not to use that bracelet. Furs felt deep regret, cursing her past self. Furs didn't blame Mrs. Alisa for giving her the items. In her eyes, Mrs. Alisa was like a mother, and the gifts were given out of goodwill. Without that bracelet, Furs might have died in some danger. Furs only blamed herself for being foolish and not heeding Mrs. Alisa's warning, leading her to use the bracelet to save herself. While Furs wished she could go back in time to slap herself, Klein also felt a bit emotional. Though he knew the Abraham family was in a bad state, it seemed their situation was worse than he imagined. From Furz's words, Klein deduced that the entire Abraham family might be suffering from the full moon whispers, which originated from Mr. Door's cries for help. Mr. Door, exiled from the present world, likely tried to use the bloodline connection to seek help from his descendants. However, the gap between them resulted in him inadvertently sending his descendants into a living hell, a grim joke indeed. Klein then thought of something else. Does the Angel of Secrets know the Abraham family's situation? The answer was undoubtedly yes. But the Angel of Secrets didn't help them escape their torment. Is it beyond his capability, or is there another reason? Klein wondered. The Angel of Secrets didn't seem like someone who would watch his descendants suffer and die. Perhaps he had already taken action, and I just don't know. Klein suppressed his doubts and looked at the visibly distressed Furs, speaking gently, regret won't change your situation. I'm sorry, Mr. Fool. I lost my composure. Furs apologized quickly, then smiled bitterly, but I don't know what to do. I know nothing about the Abraham family or how to find them. And they might not have a solution to the full moon whispers either. Furs became confused again. She now understood her torment but still couldn't find a solution. As Furs was about to spiral into despair, she heard the fool speak again, you can still improve yourself. Furs looked up in surprise at the mysterious figure at the head of the bronze table, hearing his calm, deep voice. The root cause of your suffering is your weakness. When you reach a sufficient level, you can naturally rid yourself of this trouble. Furs had a moment of clarity. The answer had always been there, but she had overlooked it. But even if I want to advance, it's not easy. Furs recalled the difficulties she faced in acquiring the Trickmaster potion, feeling a bit deflated, though not as desperate as before. Thank you for the reminder, Mr. Fool. Furs sincerely thanked him. After a moment's hesitation, she cautiously asked, Mr. Fool, can I pray to you during the full moon in the future? And what should I offer in return? Clearly, Furs hadn't forgotten that Mr. Fool favored equal exchanges. You may. Klein, who had planned to provide protection during full moons anyway, smiled and said, I am interested in the recent history of the Abraham family. If you encounter them, you can gather information for me as payment. End of chapter. Klein was not worried about Furs not encountering a member of the Abraham family. Since Furs was directly named by the angel as a writer destined to be entangled with the Abraham family, it indicated that in the future foreseen by the Angel of Secrets, Furs would definitely encounter members of the Abraham family again, and it might not just be a simple encounter. Klein even suspected that Furs might become an important member of the Abraham family in the future, which was why he suggested she collect information about the Abraham family. What if I don't meet any members of the Abraham family? Furs opened her mouth but ultimately didn't ask this question. She had a feeling that Mr. Fool seemed very confident that she would interact with the Abraham family members again. Maybe Mr. Fool has foreseen something. Perhaps that's why he's willing to protect me. Furs speculated in her heart and nodded without hesitation, I will collect information about the Abraham family for you. She had no objection to this matter. After all, even for herself, she had already planned to gather clues about the Abraham family, just in case they had a solution for her condition. As for why Mr. Fool wanted information about the Abraham family, wasn't it obvious? Mr. Fool clearly knew Bethel, so it was only natural that he wanted to learn about the descendants of him. Does this mean I've made a deal with an evil god? Furs almost instinctively thought of similar plots in various novels, making her expression slightly complicated. However, she quickly suppressed this thought. Without Mr. Fool's protection, she might not survive this time, and there was no guarantee she wouldn't lose control and become a monster next time. Furs couldn't afford to worry about such things now. If Mr. Fool asked her to harm innocent people, Furs might refuse, but it hadn't come to that yet. Having temporarily resolved the threat of the full moon whispers, Furs felt relaxed enough to look around. She noticed the bronze table and the chairs around it and tentatively asked, Mr. Fool, do you have other guests here? St. George District, a certain apartment. Furs opened her eyes but didn't get up immediately. Instead, she stared at the ceiling for a while, her pupils unfocused. After a long time, Furs seemed to come back to herself. She got up, checked her body for any anomalies, and confirmed that there were no obvious mutations before sighing in relief. From now on, I'm a follower of a hidden existence. Furs murmured, feeling a bit lost. Although Mr. Fool hadn't explicitly asked her to worship him, Furs knew what was going on. She had established contact with him, made a deal, received his protection, joined his gathering, and received the code name, the Magician. How could she not become his follower? Mr. Fool might not care about the faith of someone at a low sequence, but Furs couldn't ignore it. At least Mr. Fool doesn't seem to be an evil hidden existence. He might be a neutral deity. Furs comforted herself, but she couldn't help feeling a bit anxious and uneasy. After sitting on the floor for a while, Furs finally gathered her thoughts and started planning her future. First, I need to work on my promotion. But I don't even know the name of the Sequence 7 potion in the apprentice pathway. The Abraham family might have the formula, but I don't know how to find them. Furs scratched her head, feeling a bit overwhelmed. All she could do now was pray that Mr. Fool had indeed foreseen something and that she would find the Abraham family members soon. Otherwise, she wouldn't be able to pay back Mr. Fool for his protection. Furs didn't want to owe a god. Even the craziest people wouldn't do that, as it would bring a fate worse than death. So, that Furs lady knows as little about the Abraham family as we do. As Furs finally decided to take action, Klein, who had also left Mr. Fool's gray fog, told Lynn about Furs. Lynn, who was well aware of the situation, couldn't help but complain, he's doing this on purpose, isn't he? He could just tell me about the Abraham family or give me the whereabouts of a member, but instead, he's playing this game. Does he think he's writing some drama? A few young people with secrets and troubles unexpectedly gather together and then work together to uncover an ancient family's secrets. Lynn's brows furrowed as he said this. He then slumped over the table and said, I thought we could fast forward to contacting the Abraham family members and seeing records about Libert Abraham, but it seems we're still far from that point. Listening to Lynn, Klein felt the same frustration and could only console him. If the Angel of Secrets prophecy is correct, Furs will definitely encounter members of the Abraham family eventually. We just need to wait a bit. Let's hope so. Lynn sighed, looking a bit dejected. Then he seemed to remember something and asked, by the way, remember the Earth Mother devotee I mentioned? When do you plan to visit them? Tomorrow. We'll visit them tomorrow and see what happens, Klein replied after a moment of thought. All right, I'll clear my schedule for tomorrow and come with you, Lynn agreed. Although he hadn't been able to meet the Earth Mother due to the different flow of time, visiting her after the tea party was a good idea. Yes, while Mr. Fool was busy guiding magician Furs, the tea party of the gods in the fourth epic had also come to an end. End of chapter.